Love sometimes appears in the most unlikely places, like a secret that refuses to stay hidden. The classroom was quiet when Emily Cooper entered, adjusting her scarf while holding a stack of papers and books. The Arts and Humanities building at Clark University always seemed colder in the winter, with the wind blowing through the large windows that faced the central courtyard. At 32, Emily had been teaching contemporary literature for 4 years. She was known as a dedicated but reserved professor, someone who rarely shared personal details with colleagues or students. It was a line she always maintained, until she met Claire Bennett. On the second day of the semester, Emily was organizing the assignments on the projector when a soft voice interrupted her. "Professor Cooper?" Emily looked up and saw Claire standing at the door. She was carrying a worn leather backpack and a notebook against her chest. Her blonde hair was pulled into an effortless bun, and her brown eyes shone with a mix of curiosity and confidence. "Yes, can I help you?" Emily asked, trying to ignore the slight nervousness she felt. "I'm Claire Bennett. I'm in your advanced literature class. I need to clarify a few things about the assignment you announced yesterday." Emily nodded and gestured for Claire to come in. "Sure, have a seat." As Claire explained her difficulty with the assignment topic, Emily couldn't help but notice something peculiar about her. There was an intensity in Claire's gaze, a way of speaking that seemed carefully measured, as if every word had a purpose. "I see," Emily replied after a moment. "I think you're on the right track. You just need to refine your approach and develop your central argument further." Claire smiled, and Emily felt a slight warmth rise to her face. "Thank you, Professor. I promise I'll work on it." When Claire left, Emily sat for a moment, trying to shake off the thought that there was something different about that student. Something that made her want to observe her more closely. Over the following weeks, Emily began to notice Claire more than she should have. During class discussions, Claire always had something unique to say, a perspective that seemed to challenge the traditional ideas of her classmates. But it wasn't just Claire's intellect that caught Emily's attention, it was the way she looked at her when they spoke, as if she were trying to unravel a mystery. One Wednesday afternoon, after class had ended, Claire stayed behind as the other students left. "Professor Cooper, do you have a moment?" "Sure, Claire. What do you need?" "I wanted to talk about my presentation." "I'm unsure about the topic I chose." Emily indicated a chair next to her desk. "Let's talk." They spent the next 20 minutes discussing the assignment, but as always, the conversation veered to other topics. Claire was fascinating, and Emily found that talking with her was easy. Perhaps too easy. "Professor, did you always want to teach?" Claire asked suddenly, tilting her head with curiosity. Emily smiled, surprised by the shift in topic. "Yes, more or less. I've always loved literature, and I thought it would be a way to share that passion." Claire nodded, and for a moment, her gaze seemed more intense than usual. "I think it's amazing how you make it all seem so natural." Emily felt a slight discomfort. It wasn't common for a student to give such personal compliments. "Thank you, Claire. It's nice to know my work is helping in some way." Claire smiled, but there was something in her smile that lingered with Emily for hours after the conversation ended. On Friday, Emily was in her office reviewing some essays when she heard a knock on the door. "Professor Cooper, are you busy?" Claire appeared again, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need some caffeine." Emily smiled, accepting one of the cups. "You're my hero." They talked for almost an hour, the coffee forgotten as they discussed not just literature, but also movies, travel, and even their favorite songs. Emily realized she was laughing more than usual, feeling strangely comfortable with Claire. When Claire finally stood up to leave, she hesitated at the door. "Professor Cooper, can I ask you something personal?" Emily's heart skipped a beat, but she nodded. "Of course. Why don't you ever mention anyone? Not that it's any of my business, but it seems like you're alone." The question caught Emily off guard, and she took a moment to respond. "I guess I'm just reserved." Claire gave a soft smile, but something in her eyes suggested she knew there was more to the answer. "I see. Well, see you in the next class." When Claire left, Emily sat for a long time, trying to ignore what she was feeling. It was just admiration, she told herself. Claire was brilliant, and Emily simply appreciated her dedication. But deep down, she knew she was trying to deny something far more complicated. At the end of the following week, Claire sent a short email. Professor Cooper, thank you for always being so open in discussions. I'd love to talk more about literature outside of class, if it's not a problem. Claire. Emily hesitated before replying. She knew she should set boundaries, but something inside her made her type. Sure, I'd be happy to help. See you after class on Monday. When Claire showed up for their meeting, the conversation started like any other, but quickly veered into more personal matters. You know, Professor, you're much more interesting than you think. Emily nervously laughed. I'm not sure I agree with that. Claire tilted her head, observing her with a curious smile. Maybe you need someone to remind you of that. Emily didn't answer. Her heart was racing, but she knew she couldn't cross that line. She couldn't. Monday arrived, bringing with it a weight that Emily couldn't quite explain. She was in the classroom grading papers when Claire entered right on time, a shy smile on her face. Time seemed to slow down whenever Claire was near. Professor Cooper, ready to dive into more literature? Claire joked, setting her backpack on the chair beside her. Emily smiled, but there was a hesitation in the air. Always ready. The meeting began as usual, with Claire presenting her ideas for the upcoming assignment. But, as always, the conversation began to flow into more personal topics. You said you've loved literature since you were young, Claire commented, her eyes fixed on Emily. But what else do you love? The question was simple, yet it carried a tone that made Emily uncomfortable. I think I love a lot of things, she replied, trying to sound casual. Like what? Claire insisted, leaning slightly forward. Emily hesitated, feeling the weight of Claire's gaze. Travel. Music. Simple things, like coffee on a quiet morning. Claire smiled, and for a moment, the silence between them felt more significant than any answer could. You have something about you, Professor Cooper, Claire finally said, her voice low. Something that makes people want to get to know you more deeply. Emily felt her face flush, but before she could respond, Claire stood up, as if realizing she had crossed an invisible line. Thanks for your time, Professor. I really appreciate it. She left before Emily could say anything more, leaving behind a room full of unanswered questions and a heart beating faster than it should have. The following days passed with a strange tension hanging between them. During classes, Emily worked hard to treat Claire like any other student, but every encounter felt like a dangerous balancing act. That Friday, as Emily was about to leave campus, she saw Claire waiting at the entrance of the building. Professor Cooper, Claire called, running over to her. Emily stopped, feeling the cold wind of the early evening. Claire, is everything okay? Yes, I just wanted to ask if you have plans for today. Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised by the direct question. Nothing specific. I was heading to the cafe on the corner to review some things. Would you like to join me? Emily hesitated, knowing she should decline. But for some reason, the words that came out were, sure, why not? The cafe was cozy, with warm lights hanging from the ceiling and the scent of fresh coffee filling the air. They sat at a table in the back, and Claire ordered 2 cappuccinos without asking. So, what did you think of the last class? Emily asked, trying to keep the conversation light. It was interesting, as always, Claire replied, but there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't interested in discussing literature. Emily tried to focus on her cappuccino, but Claire's gaze seemed to burn through her. Professor, can I ask you something? Emily swallowed hard. Of course. Why do you always keep your distance? Emily frowned, confused. Distance? You're so careful, so reserved. It's like you're afraid of connecting with people. Emily's chest tightened. Claire was touching on something she wasn't ready to confront. It's not that. I just think it's important to maintain boundaries. Claire leaned forward, her gaze fixed on Emily. Boundaries are important, yes. But sometimes, they stop us from living things that really matter. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she looked away, feeling a weight in her words that she wasn't ready to admit. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Claire's words echoed in her mind, challenging everything she believed was right. She knew there was something between them, something that went beyond what could be explained. The following week, Claire started showing up more often. Sometimes it was to discuss literature. Other times, it was just to chat. The barrier Emily had been trying to maintain slowly began to crumble, piece by piece. It was during one of these visits to the office that Claire crossed the line Emily had been so afraid of. "Professor, I need to say something." Emily looked at her, trying to keep her composure. "You can say it. I know this might seem wrong, but I feel something for you." Emily's heart raced, and for a moment, she was silent. "Claire, we can't." Claire nodded, but the look in her eyes was determined. "I know, but I can't pretend I don't feel it. And I think you feel something too." Emily felt like the ground was falling away beneath her feet. "This is complicated, Claire. You're my student. Just for a few more months. And I'm not asking for anything right now. I just needed you to know." Before Emily could respond, Claire grabbed her backpack and left, leaving her alone in the office with a mess of emotions she didn't know how to process. In the days that followed, Emily tried to avoid Claire. It was easier to ignore what she felt than to face the reality. But Claire seemed to be everywhere, in the classroom, in the hallway, in the campus cafe. Finally, on a rainy afternoon, Emily was leaving the building when she saw Claire waiting under an awning. "We need to talk," Claire said before Emily could say anything. Emily hesitated but nodded. They walked in silence to the nearby cafe, where Claire finally broke the silence. "I know this is complicated, but I can't pretend there's not something real between us." Emily looked at her, feeling the weight of every word. "And what if it goes wrong? What if it goes right?" Claire countered with a sad smile. Emily remained silent, but deep down, she knew Claire was right. The tension between Emily and Claire seemed unbearable in the days that followed. Emily tried to maintain the distance, but Claire's presence was like a magnet, pulling her in with every glance, every word, every shared moment. The fear of crossing an invisible line was there, but more and more, it was overshadowed by something deeper, the desire to experience something real, even if it was wrong in the eyes of the world. It was on a Friday night, when most of the students had left campus for the weekend, that Emily finally gave in. She was in her office, grading papers, when Claire entered without knocking, shutting the door behind her. "Claire, I really think," Emily started, but stopped when she saw the expression on Claire's face. "I need an answer, Emily." Claire used her first name for the first time, and the sound of it in her confident tone made Emily tremble. "I can't keep pretending that this isn't real." Emily fell silent, her heart pounding in her chest. "Claire, this is complicated." "I know." Claire took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "But we can't ignore this forever. And what if someone finds out? What if it ruins everything I've worked for?" Emily asked, her voice trembling, but her feet stayed rooted. Claire reached out, gently touching Emily's hand. "I would never do anything to hurt you. But sometimes, the things that are worth it require taking risks." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, battling the emotions that flooded her. Then, almost involuntarily, she leaned forward, and their lips met. The kiss was full of repressed emotion, a whirlwind of fear, desire, and something neither of them dared to name. When they pulled away, they were both breathless, and Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "We'll figure it out together," Claire responded, with a smile that blended vulnerability and determination. In the days that followed, Emily and Claire began to explore their relationship in secret. Each meeting was carefully planned, every word exchanged loaded with meaning. To everyone else, they were still just professor and student, but in their stolen moments, they were something much more. "You're so brave," Emily said one night as they sat on the couch in Claire's apartment. "I just know what I want," Claire replied, holding her hand. "And I want you." Emily knew there was a limit to how long they could keep this up, But for now, she allowed herself to be swept away by Claire, by her intensity and her ability to make everything feel possible. But the secret couldn't last forever. One seemingly normal day, as Emily was leaving the classroom, she was approached by a colleague, Professor Marks. "Cooper, can I talk to you for a moment?" "Of course," she replied, trying to mask the tension in her voice. Marks looked uncomfortable. "I don't want to cause any trouble, but some people have been talking about how much time you and Claire Bennett have been spending together. I just thought I should warn you. You know how people love to talk." Emily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "Thanks for the heads up, Marks. I'll be careful." When Claire showed up at the office that evening, Emily was visibly shaken. "What happened?" Claire asked, approaching her. "Someone suspects us." "Who?" "I don't know. A colleague warned me." "Claire, this isn't sustainable." Claire took Emily's face in her hands, forcing her to look into her eyes. "I don't care what others say. I only care about what we feel. But I do care," Emily replied, her voice breaking. "I've worked so hard to get here. And if I lose everything because of this, then we end it?" Claire asked, her voice filled with pain. Emily was silent, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know if I can do that." The following week, Emily avoided Claire. She didn't answer her calls or reply to her messages. She knew she was being cowardly, but she believed it was better to cut everything off before it was too late. But Claire didn't give up. That Friday night, she showed up at Emily's apartment. "You can't ignore me forever," Claire said firmly. "I'm not ignoring you," Emily replied quietly. "I'm trying to protect you. That's not what I'm asking for. I don't want protection. I want you." Emily was silent, the internal struggle clear on her face. "Claire, I love you. But that doesn't mean we can be together." Claire stepped forward, her resolve unshakable. "And if we don't try, we'll never know." Finally, Emily gave in. "Let's keep this a secret until the end of the semester. When you graduate, we'll see where this takes us." Claire smiled, and Emily knew that, for the first time, she was ready to face the consequences of her choices. The semester came to an end, and Claire handed in her final essay with a perfect grade. When she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, her eyes met Emily's in the audience. The smile they exchanged was a shared secret, a silent pact that, no matter what came next, they would face it together. And for the first time, Emily felt that maybe love was worth the risk. If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $sign icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you. Thank you so much for your support. You make all the difference here on the channel. See you in the next video.